Hi, Gary Forster here. I volunteered to give this stewardship message this week, not because I'm not nervous about it, but because I think it's really important. I was a camp director, you might have known, for my whole career for the YMCA. It's where I met my wife. She was the camp nurse. And I was lucky enough to be able to have camps that every morning before breakfast we'd have a chapel service where the kids would go to sit in a rustic amphitheater and look out over the water, and a counselor would share a devotional thought, inspirational story, and then lead a song. I'd make sure that I always was the one that would get Saturdays before the kids went home so that I could send them home on a high note. And this is the song that I would sing them. But first, like them, I have to fill you in on a couple things you might not remember, especially you kids out there. Any of you ever see one of those old-fashioned pumps where you have to pump to work the handle up and down to get the water to come out? Well, the way those work, every time you push down, a long steel rod goes in the ground and catches hold of some water and sucks it up. Each time you push the handle, it gets closer and closer to the top. Now, nowadays, that washer's made out of neoprene and other fancy materials. But back in the old days, that sucker washer was made out of leather. And you ever have a snowball fight in the wintertime and your gloves get all wet? So you set them by the heater overnight and the next morning, they're all hard and crinkly. Well, you can imagine a sucker washer made out of leather that got all dried out couldn't suck very well. Now, have you ever had one of those dart guns or Nerf bow and arrows that had suction cups on the end? If you wanted to stick it right in the middle of the forehead of your little brother, what would you have to do? Right, you'd lick it first. That's the same way a sucker washer works. If you get it wet, it can suck all the water. But you can't get your tongue way down in that well, so you'd have to save some water from the last time you pumped. Back in the old days, they'd often keep it in a vinegar jar like this because you could see it was full and it was easy to pour in. My dad would tell me stories growing up on the farm. That's the only way they could get their water. And if in the morning he hadn't filled that priming bottle last night, his mama would want to whip his ass and send him off to the neighbor's house to collect some water so they could get back to pumping. He'd be in a heap of trouble if he didn't refill that bottle. So you're probably asking, why in the world is Gary talking about sucker washers and priming jars during this church service? Well, if I can get this right, maybe you'll find out soon. I was traveling west of Buckskin on my way to a cattle run, across the cactus desert under a hard, hot baking sun. Thirsty down to my toenails, I stopped, ran out and stopped. I tell you, couldn't believe it when I looked and saw that pump. I took it to be a mirage at first, that a fool, a thirsty man. But then I saw a note stuck on a baking powder can. This pump is old, the note began, but she works. Give her a try. I put a new sucker wash in her. You may find that leather dry. You gotta prime the pump. You must have faith and believe. You gotta give of yourself before you're worthy to receive. Drink all the water you can hold. Wash your face and cool your feet. But leave that bottle full for others. Thank you kindly, Desert Pete. Well, you're gonna have to prime that pump. Well, you're gonna have to prime that pump and work the handle like there's a fire. Under a rock, you find some water left there in a vinegar jar. Now, don't go drinking none. You're gonna just pour it in the pump like that. Now, there's just enough to prime it with, so don't go drinking none, doggone it. Just pour it in and pump like mad. I'm sure you'll quench your thirst. You gotta prime the pump. You must have faith and believe. You gotta give of yourself before you're worthy to receive. Drink all the water you can hold. Wash your face and cool your feet. But leave that bottle full for others. Thank you kindly, Desert Pete. Well, I found the jar, and I'll tell you, there's nothing prettier to my eye. I was tempted strong to drink it, 'cause that pump looked mighty dry. But the note went on, have faith, my friend, there's water down below. You gotta give to really get, and I'm the one to know. You gotta prime the pump, you must have faith and believe. You gotta give it yourself, you're worthy to receive. Drink all the water you can hold, wash your face and cool your feet. But leave that bottle full for others, thank you kindly, Desert Pete. Well, I poured in the jar and started pumping and heard that beautiful sound. A water bubbling and splashing above that hole in the ground. So I took off my shoes and dropped my feet to feel that cool, refreshing treat. And I thanked the Lord, and I thanked the pump, and of course, old Desert Pete. You gotta prime the pump, you must have faith and believe. You give it yourself before you're worthy to receive. Drink all the water you can hold, wash your face and cool your feet. But leave that bottle full for others, thank you kindly, Desert Pete. And so then I'd tell the kids, you came to this camp, beginning of our session, and inside of you, each one of you have a jar. If you jiggle, maybe you can feel it. Inside your chest, it's full of happiness and confidence and love. And some of them are more filled than others, but it belongs to you. And when you get to a new place, like the first day of school, you might be really tempted just to keep it to yourself. Just take a little sip now and then so you can get through the day. But when you got to camp, our counselors asked you to do something different. We asked you to take that top off and meet some other kids, to learn their names, to share some stories about where they're from and where you're from, to sing some songs, play some games, learn some new things. You were taking that bottle of yours and sprinkling it all over the other kids and the counselors and all over the camp. Now, I'm going to guess that your bottle has never been as full as it is right now, just because you were willing to empty it out. And as a result, you made everybody else's stay at camp better. I got some bad news. We're going home today. And those folks back home that sent you here, parents, family members, friends, they probably didn't have as good a time as we did. So when you get there, they're going to ask you, how was camp? Did you have a good time? Did you make any friends? And you might be real tempted to sit in the back seat and just take a little sip and say, yeah, it was okay. Desert Pete says, don't do that. Take off the top. Sprinkle some on those folks. Sprinkle some on Mom. Tell her the fun you had here. Tell her about your friends. Sing her a song. Maybe even teach them Johnny Appleseed Grace when you have meal together. You'd be surprised how many people will give you smiles and even sing along, even in a restaurant. And as a result, their jar will become just as full as yours. And maybe you'll be able to come back and join us next year and start it all over again. Pretty nice character message. Pretty good marketing, too. But singing this song over 25 years, maybe a dozen or more times every summer, you could probably imagine that my mind might wander a bit in the middle of the song as I'm singing it. And instead of concentrating on the guy who's telling the story, who finds the well, I started to imagine Desert Pete, the old guy that left the note and filled the bottle. And I'm thinking in my mind, he's probably an old prospector with a mule named Esmeralda, maybe. And he would pack Esmeralda down with all the supplies he would need. Coffee and sourdough starter and flour and cans of beans and a lot of canteens that he'd fill up at this old well. And he'd head out to go prospecting for a couple weeks at a time, looking for gold and silver. Now, I don't know about you, but if that was me and my life really depended on the water in this well, I would be really nervous about people finding it. I mean, who knows? They might use it all up. They might let their dog pee on it. They might build a condominium right next door to it. So I would maybe take some tumbleweeds and pile it all up to hide it. Brush out my feet with sagebrush when I left, hoping that nobody else would find it. Desert Pete doesn't do that. Desert Pete even puts a big sign up that says, hey, the water's over here, and don't waste your time trying until you get my priming jar of water hiding under a rock. The only thing I ask you to do is when you're all done, fill it back up again and leave it for the rest of us. Wow. So I'm thinking of Desert Pete out there, and after a couple weeks, he's used up his canteens, and he and Esmeralda are getting pretty thirsty, and he says, Esmeralda, time to go back to the pump. And he imagines, wait a minute, I didn't hide that pump like Gary told me to do. I put a sign on it and told people where my priming jar was. He starts getting a little nervous. He gets closer and he sees footprints around the well that weren't his and weren't Esmeralda's. He sees the rock that he always leaves over top of that vinegar jar, always north and south for good luck. Somebody had left it pointing east and west, which means somebody's found it and used it. His heart's beating fast. He shuffles on over there and lifts up the rock and grabs that jar that 2 weeks ago he had left 2/3 full of water, and now that jar is filled to the very top. And he falls back on the stump to sit, and he sees those footprints around the well. And he has to imagine who those peoples were, who those souls that were saved by his generosity. Most of those folks he may never meet, and he's not likely going to get thanked by any of them. But gosh, does he know it was the right thing to do. So could you do me a favor? If you haven't already filled out your pledge form for this coming year, I hope most of you got them in the mail. And you can either fill it out and mail it back, or you can go online to the website and you can even fill it out there and email it straight back. Or if you can't do any of those things, just call the office and they'll help you fill it out right over the phone, so you know you got it done. Because you got to prime the pump. You got to prime the pump. You must faith and believe. You got to give of yourself before you're worthy to receive. Drink all the water you can hold. Wash your face and cool your feet. But leave that bottle full for others. Thank you kindly, Desert Pete. Thank you kindly. Sincerely yours, Desert Pete. Oh, and one more favor. Don't ask me to sing any more songs, because this is the only one I ever bothered to learn. Fortunately, it's a pretty good one. Thanks.